and welcome to Smaulgld's Central Bank of Russia monthly gold additions to reserves for the month of November 2016. The Central Bank of Russia added 1 million ounces of gold to its reserves in November. That is the equivalent of 31.1 tons of gold. Now, last month, the Central Bank of Russia added 1.3 million ounces of gold to her reserves, which was a record for the Central Bank of Russia in a given month. This is the second month in a row now, adding to October's 1.3 million ounces, November's 1 million ounces. This is the second month in a row that Russia has added 1 million ounces of gold to her reserves. From January 2016 through November 2016, Russia has added over 196 tons of gold to her reserves. Last year, in a record year, they added 212 tons. So with a decent December, they will probably surpass that and set a new record in 2016. November's gold addition of 31 tons brings their total gold holdings to 1,614 tons, the sixth most of any nation. The Russian central bank has added well over 70% more gold to her reserves than the People's Bank of China over the past 12 months. I always remind everybody, when I talk about the central banks, I mean the central banks. I don't mean the countries. The People's Bank of China is the Central Bank of China. It does not include all the gold that's in China. It does not include all the gold that the government either owns or has access to. It's just the Central Bank of China, which is the People's Bank of China, and the Russian Central Bank is the same thing. But if you compare central bank to central bank, the Russians are adding far more gold to their reserves than any other nation, including China. Now remember, China and Russia are major gold producers, and they basically add a lot of their own gold to their central bank reserves. In fact, Russia has agreements to sell some gold to China. Kazakhstan is the other central bank, and we've done a report on that, and we'll cover that now monthly. Kazakhstan also adds the gold that it mines to its reserves. But those are the three central banks that are really the only ones adding gold to reserves. The rest of the Western central banks are not adding gold to their reserves. Overall, Russian reserves did fall from 390 billion to 385 billion in November. Let's take a look at the chart. From June 2015 to November 2016, Russia, the Central Bank of Russia, has gone from 1,281 tons of gold to 1,614. There's a reminder, if you're interested in helping out Smaulgld and supporting the site, as many of you are doing, some of you on a regular basis, thank you very much. You can donate via PayPal or via Bitcoin. I now accept Bitcoin. I've gotten a few donations there, which I'm very appreciative of. Now, since 2009, Russia has added about 965 tons of gold to reserve, and that's more than China, who's added only about 775. Now, those are the two largest gold adding central banks, but Russia definitely has them beat. Let's take a look at the monthly gold purchases of Russia over the past almost 2 years, from June 2014 to November 2016. You can see there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, almost six months where Russia added over 1 million ounces of gold to reserves, and this year they've added nearly 200 tons of gold. Since June 2014, Russia has added 17.2 million ounces. That's 535 tons in just that short time period. Here's a reminder to sign up for Smaulgld updates. You can do that by going to the Smaulgld website, just filling in your email address. It's free. I don't spam you. I only send out an email every so often, maybe 2, 3, 4 times a week, depending on the content flow. And also, I don't email each and every blog post, so you get an update. But the main reason to subscribe to Smaulgld is that I also send out sometimes special subscriber information, and also if they ever shut the YouTube channel down for whatever reason, you will still be able to stay in touch. I'll be able to continue to supply content through other means, either through Vimeo or other ways of doing podcasts or blog posts. I think there's another one called there's Vine, and there's also can't think of the name of it. There's a podcast that a lot of people use. But in any event, the point being is that if you subscribe to Smaulgld, it's a way of staying in touch and continuing your flow of information about gold and silver uninterrupted. Also, if you're interested in buying gold or silver, you can do so through the site. Smaulgld gets a small commission. That's another way, in addition to the donations, that Smaulgld manages to stay, not in business, because I don't make any money from this, but manages to cover some of the costs. You can check out a few top gold and silver coin dealers on Smaulgld.com. I'll also leave a couple of links below this YouTube video where you can compare prices and shipping. And if you do buy, Smaulgld gets a small commission. It's not a recommendation to buy gold or silver, but if you're going to, I'm not going to stop you. I'm not going to try to talk you out of it. And Smaulgld makes a small commission. So if you are interested, please check out the gold and silver dealers that are featured on the Smaulgld website. As I mentioned, Russia is adding gold at a much faster pace than China. I've put together a chart here where you can see over the past year, China has been adding more gold to its reserves, to her reserves, and almost every month they add more. And in recent months, it's really become extreme. You can see the differences there. Russia's added 122 more tons of gold than China has just in the last year. And China's added a decent amount, although last month they didn't add any. And they didn't add any in, what was it looks like that is, no, it's Russia didn't add any in May. Okay, let's see, where does that put Russia now after this big 2 months where they added over 2.3 million ounces of gold? Well, they're starting to catch China. They're nipping at their heels there. They got 1,614 tons. They are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. They're in sixth place. You don't count the IMF among nations. So Russia and China vaulted into the top 10 over the past 4 or 5 years. These other countries, US, Germany, Italy, France, they don't add any gold to reserves. United States doesn't audit its gold. That supposedly is the same amount of gold they've had since Nixon closed the gold window in 1971. No way of knowing without an audit if that number is real. Germany is repatriating gold, but they're not adding gold to their reserves. Same with the Netherlands, Belgium, which is in the top 20. The only countries that are adding gold, as I mentioned, are China, Russia, and Kazakhstan. And Russia is now sixth. If they continue at this pace, maybe in 3 or 4 years, they'll crack the top 5. And same with Russia, same with China. Overall Russian reserves, they've grown about 15 billion since January. Russia seems to be out of the woods from the sanctions a few years back. They're still struggling with lower oil prices, but their central bank has done a pretty decent job of keeping the reserve levels high. There's some inflation in Russia, but they seem to be doing well, for at least as Russia does, through their monetary policy. And of course, adding gold to the reserves. Here's their treasury holdings. Russia has cut back on their treasury holdings they never had that much. At one point, they're almost 200 million worth of treasury bonds. Right now, they're about 74.6 billion, but they have sold off about half of their treasuries over the past 2 or 3 years. But they really don't have, I mean, if you remember QE, it's like a month's worth of QE. So it's not like Russia holds the cards where they have a lot of treasuries, and if they were to somehow to dump their treasuries, it would create a big deal because they don't really have that many to dump. And all nations do hold US treasuries because they're liquid, and they do have need to have some in reserves, and Russia does, but they don't have an inordinate amount. And they're increasing their gold reserves as a percentage of overall reserves, and they're up to about 15-16% of their reserves. And of course, as we mentioned, they are buying their own gold from their own domestic gold mines. They're either second or third behind China in overall gold production. Sometimes it's Australia, sometimes it's Russia. But you can see here, they're adding. Last year they had 208. This year they'll probably add about the same. They'll probably mine about 300 tons. The rest of it probably ends up in China. So as far as Russia's top production, China's top production, that gold doesn't leave China or Russia. and those are the two. And the world has to rely on the other nations to supply its gold. And Kazakhstan isn't really sending much gold out either. So you got to go to South Africa, you got to go to Australia, you have to go to the other countries, Canada, the United States, in order to get the rest of the world's gold. And that kind of explains why the other central banks aren't really adding gold. And the other reason is that they are totally bought into the fiat system, and they really think gold undermines the fiat system. They're not willing to give up their gold, although some nations have. Canada's given up all their gold. The Canadian Central Bank has no gold. Central Bank of England, the Bank of England, has sold most of its gold. Swiss Bank sold more than half of its gold, the Swiss National Bank. So they do kind of not only not add to it, but they have sold in recent years. None of them have sold in the past 5, 10 years, but prior to that, well, Canada's gotten rid of all of its gold, but China, England, and the Swiss national banks did do some dumping of gold in the past 20 years, 15, 20 years. Indian government, as much as they've been trying to grab gold from its citizens, it hasn't added any gold to the Royal Bank of India in a long time. It's stuck at about 558 tons. That about does it for today. Tomorrow I hope to have the American Gold Eagle numbers up, and then the rest of the U.S. Mint numbers as they come in, the American Gold Buffaloes, and then of course the Perth Mint at the end of the year. And I will be getting the third quarter Canadian Mint numbers, so we'll find out how they did in the third quarter. We won't find out their full year numbers till next year. Thanks again for listening, and we'll talk to you tomorrow.